Nicole wiped the sweat from her forehead, exhaustion weighing heavily on her body. It had been a long day of scrubbing floors, wiping tables, and making sure the entire office sparkled. She worked the night shift as a cleaner in one of the most prestigious companies in Lagos, Kingston Enterprises. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to put food on the table and pay the bills. Tonight was no different. After hours of cleaning, she found herself in the CEO's private bathroom. She sighed, kneeling to scrub the toilet. The job wasn't glamorous, but she did it with all her heart. Her hands ached from hours of work, and her eyelids felt heavy. Just a few minutes of rest wouldn't hurt, right? Before she knew it, her body betrayed her. She rested her head against the toilet closet, just for a moment, and drifted into a deep sleep. Meanwhile, Jayden Kingston, the billionaire CEO of Kingston Enterprises, walked into his private office after a late-night meeting. The world saw him as a ruthless businessman, a man who built his empire from the ground up. He had everything: money, power, and influence, but deep inside, something was missing. He loosened his tie and decided to freshen up. His private bathroom was always spotless, a place of peace away from the chaos of work. But when he opened the door, he stopped in his tracks. There, resting her head on the toilet seat, was a young woman dressed in a cleaning uniform. Her brown hair framed her peaceful face, her chest rising and falling softly. At first, Jayden thought she had fainted. He took a step closer, but then he noticed the mop still gripped in her tired hands. She had fallen asleep while working. Something about the sight made his heart ache. He could tell she was exhausted beyond words. A part of him wanted to wake her up, but another part wanted to let her rest. How long had she been working to be this tired? For the first time in a long time, Jayden felt something stir inside him, a deep curiosity and unexpected concern. Jayden stood there for a moment, watching the sleeping lady. He had never seen someone so exhausted that they would fall asleep in a place like this. His life had always been about business, deals, and making more money, but this was different. Something inside him softened. Who was she? He had never paid attention to the cleaning staff before, but now he found himself unable to look away. Slowly, he crouched beside her and hesitated. He didn't want to startle her, but she couldn't sleep here all night. So with the gentlest touch, he reached out and shook her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly. "Wake up." Nicole stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. For a moment she was confused. Where was she? Then it hit her. The bathroom, the cleaning, the work. Oh no. She gasped and sat up so quickly that she nearly lost her balance. When her eyes focused, she froze. The CEO. Her heart pounded wildly in her chest as she stared at the man in front of her, Jayden Kingston. She had only ever seen him from afar, on TV, in magazines, or during the rare times he walked through the office. And now he was right here, inches away from her, staring at her with unreadable eyes. I'm so sorry, sir," Nicole stammered, scrambling to her feet. "I didn't mean to fall asleep. I was just—" She looked down, embarrassed. She knew how this looked. Sleeping on the job? She was surely going to be fired. Jayden studied her carefully. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the weariness in her posture. He had met thousands of people in his life, businessmen, politicians, celebrities, but none had ever looked at him with the same mixture of fear and desperation that she did right now. He didn't know why, but he didn't want her to be afraid of him. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice calm. Nicole swallowed. Why was he asking for her name? Was he going to report her? Nicole," she said hesitantly. Jayden nodded. "Nicole, how long have you been working here?" She blinked, surprised by the question. 6 months?" He crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. "Do they always make you work this late?" Nicole lowered her gaze. She didn't know why he was asking, but she didn't want to complain. "It's part of the job," she mumbled. Jayden frowned. No one should have to work so hard that they fall asleep in a bathroom. After a moment, he sighed and reached into his pocket. Nicole's eyes widened as he pulled out a black wallet and took out $100 bill. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. Nicole's face turned red with embarrassment. Was he paying her to leave? Did he think she was some kind of beggar? "No, sir," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I don't want your money." Jayden raised an eyebrow. "It's not charity. Consider it a bonus for tonight. Go home and get some rest." Nicole hesitated. She could really use the money. Her rent was due soon, and her little brother needed school supplies. But taking money from her boss like this felt strange. Still, she had no choice. With trembling fingers, she took the bill. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping it tightly. Jayden nodded. "Go home, Nicole, and be careful." Nicole didn't know why, but his words sent a shiver down her spine. As she quickly gathered her things and left the bathroom, Jayden watched her go, an unfamiliar feeling settling in his chest. He had never cared about anyone like this before. Nicole hurried out of the office building, her heart still racing. The cool night air hit her face, but it did little to calm her nerves. Did that really just happen? She clutched the $100 bill in her hand, staring at it as she walked to the nearest bus stop. It felt strange, accepting money from the CEO himself. Why did he give it to me? Was it pity? Or was he just being kind? Her feet ached, her body was drained, but sleep was the last thing on her mind. She had spent months working at Kingston Enterprises without ever thinking twice about her boss. But tonight changed everything. She had always heard stories about him. Some said he was cold and ruthless, a man who only cared about money. Others claimed he was a genius, a self-made billionaire who never wasted time on emotions. But the man she had met tonight, he was different. Why did he look at her that way? Her bus arrived, pulling her from her thoughts. She stepped on board, took a seat by the window, and sighed deeply. She needed to forget about this. He was her boss, and she was just a cleaning lady. In his penthouse. Jayden sat in his home office, staring at his glass of whiskey. His mind replayed the moment in the bathroom over and over again. Nicole. She was different from anyone he had ever met. Most people around him wanted something, money, power, or a connection. But Nicole? She hadn't even wanted his money. Jayden wasn't used to caring about people. He had built his company by being ruthless and focused, never letting emotions get in the way. But tonight, seeing that tired girl asleep in his bathroom had stirred something deep inside him. Why did he care so much? He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. This wasn't normal. He had meetings, deals, and responsibilities. He shouldn't be thinking about a cleaning lady, and yet he was. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. "Sir, the finance report for next quarter is ready. Should I send it over?" Jayden sighed and replied, "Yes. Email it to me." Work was what he needed to focus on. But even as he tried to push Nicole from his mind, he knew deep down, this wasn't the last time he would think about her. Not even close. Nicole stepped into her tiny apartment and locked the door behind her. The silence of the small space welcomed her, but instead of feeling at peace, she felt restless. She tossed her bag on the worn-out couch and walked to the fridge, hoping to find something to eat. A half-empty carton of milk and a leftover loaf of bread from the previous day stared back at her. Not much, but enough. As she ate, her mind wandered back to Jayden Kingston. She had never spoken to him before tonight, yet the way he had looked at her, it was as if he actually saw her, not just as an employee, but as a person. Why would a man like him care about a woman like me? She shook her head, trying to dismiss the thought. It was foolish to dwell on this. Jayden was a billionaire, a man who lived in a world completely different from hers. She was just a struggling cleaner who worked long hours to survive. And yet, something about him felt different. Nicole sighed and rubbed her eyes. Enough. She had work again tomorrow, and she needed rest. The next morning, Jayden sat in his office, staring at the stack of documents in front of him. Normally, he would be focused on business, closing deals, signing contracts, making more money, but today his mind was elsewhere. He hadn't been able to shake the image of Nicole sleeping in the bathroom. Why did he care? He had seen exhausted employees before. He had even fired people for sleeping on the job. But something about Nicole made him pause. There was a knock on the door. "Come in," he said, his voice firm. His assistant, Elena, walked in, holding a tablet. "Sir, the marketing team is waiting for you in the conference room. They're ready to present the new campaign." Jayden nodded, standing up. "I'll be there in a minute." Elena hesitated for a moment. "Sir, is everything all right?" Jayden glanced at her, surprised by the question. He wasn't one to show emotions, but apparently something in his demeanor had changed. "I'm fine," he said shortly, brushing past her. But deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't fine. He was thinking about Nicole, and he wasn't sure why. Nicole arrived at work feeling more anxious than usual. She had spent the whole night convincing herself that her encounter with Jayden Kingston meant nothing. He was just being kind. That's all. But her heart wasn't so sure. Dressed in her cleaning uniform, she tied her apron tightly around her waist and grabbed her supplies. Today, she decided to avoid the CEO's office altogether. If she stayed out of his way, she could pretend last night never happened. But fate had other plans. As she walked down the hallway, pushing her cleaning cart, she suddenly heard footsteps approaching. Before she could react, she looked up, and there he was, Jayden. Nicole's heart nearly stopped. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his presence commanding as always. But instead of walking past her like he usually did, he stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Nicole's fingers tightened around the handle of her cart. Should she say something? Should she apologize again? Should she pretend not to notice him? Jayden studied her, his gaze unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he said, "Did you get some rest?" Nicole blinked. Was he seriously asking about her sleep? Yes, sir," she stammered, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. He nodded slightly. "Good." There was an awkward pause before he spoke again. "How long have you been working night shifts?" Nicole hesitated. Why was he suddenly interested in her schedule? "Since I started," she answered carefully. "I need the extra hours." Jayden frowned. He could tell from her expression that she didn't want to say more. He could push for answers, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. Instead, he said something that shocked them both. "You shouldn't be working this hard." Nicole's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" Jayden's jaw clenched slightly, as if he hadn't meant to say that out loud. But now that the words were out, he didn't take them back. "I saw how exhausted you were last night," he continued. "No one should have to work themselves to the point of passing out in a bathroom." Nicole swallowed. She didn't know how to respond. No one had ever cared about her well-being before. Not like this. Before she could gather her thoughts, Jayden checked his watch. "I have a meeting," he said, "but we'll talk later." Talk later? Nicole barely had time to process those words before Jayden turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, stunned. What was happening? Why was her billionaire boss suddenly interested in her life? And more importantly, why did she feel like this was only the beginning? Nicole spent the rest of the morning in a daze. "We'll talk later." Those words kept echoing in her head. Why? Why would someone like Jayden Kingston want to talk to her again? She tried to focus on her work, scrubbing the windows and vacuuming the hallways, but her hands trembled slightly. She had always stayed invisible, doing her job quietly and keeping her head down. That was how she survived. But now? Now the most powerful man in the company had noticed her, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Meanwhile, in Jayden's office, Jayden sat at his desk, trying and failing to concentrate on the financial reports in front of him. His mind kept drifting back to Nicole. Why did he care? She was just a cleaner. He had never once paid attention to any of his staff before, but when he saw her sleeping in the bathroom last night, something inside him shifted. She wasn't like the women in his world, those who smiled at him only because of his money. Nicole didn't even seem comfortable taking the extra cash he had given her. That was rare. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said. His assistant, Elena, entered, holding a folder. "Sir, the investment team needs your approval on the new partnership deal." Jayden sighed. He needed to push thoughts of Nicole aside and focus. Business first. He took the folder from Elena and flipped through the documents, but even as he scanned the pages, his mind was elsewhere. This wasn't like him. He never got distracted. But today, he had to admit the truth to himself. Nicole was different. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to know more. Later. That night, Nicole finished her shift and grabbed her bag, ready to leave. She hadn't seen Jayden again after their brief conversation that morning, and part of her was relieved. But as she walked towards the exit, she heard a voice behind her. "Nicole." She froze. Slowly, she turned around, and there he was. Jayden stood near the elevator, his sharp suit crisp, his piercing gaze fixed on her. "I told you we'd talk later," he said smoothly. Nicole's heart pounded. What did he want from her? And why did she feel like her life was about to change forever? Nicole's breath caught in her throat as she stared at Jayden. Why was he waiting for her? Her instinct told her to run, to avoid whatever conversation he wanted to have. But her feet stayed frozen in place. Jayden took a step closer, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. "I meant what I said earlier," he began, his voice smooth but firm. "You shouldn't be working this hard." Nicole swallowed. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but this is my job. I don't have a choice." Jayden's eyes darkened slightly. He didn't like that answer. "There's always a choice," he countered. Nicole shook her head. "Not for people like me." Jayden frowned. He wasn't used to hearing that kind of response. In his world, people made choices. They built businesses, controlled their lives, and took charge of their futures. But Nicole spoke as if she had no power over hers. Something about that didn't sit right with him. "Do you have family?" he asked suddenly. Nicole hesitated before nodding. "A little brother. I take care of him." Jayden studied her carefully. That explained a lot. "You're responsible for him?" "Yes." Nicole looked down, gripping the strap of her bag tightly. "It's just the two of us." Jayden felt something stir inside him, something unfamiliar. He had met countless people who only cared about themselves, but Nicole was different. She was carrying the weight of someone else's life on her shoulders. He respected that, and for some reason he didn't want her struggling anymore. Before he could say anything else, Nicole cleared her throat. "I should go. It's late." Jayden glanced at the dark streets outside. "How are you getting home?" Nicole hesitated. "The bus." Jayden checked his watch. "At this hour?" His brows furrowed. "That's not safe." "I've been doing it for months," Nicole said, forcing a small smile. "I'll be fine." Jayden exhaled, then, without another word, he pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. A few seconds later, he looked at her. "I'm having my driver take you home." Nicole's eyes widened. "What?" "No, sir, that's not necessary." "It's not up for discussion," he interrupted. "It's late. You're exhausted. You shouldn't be taking public transport alone at this hour." Nicole opened her mouth to protest but stopped. Why was he doing this? Why did he care? Jayden seemed to read her mind. "Let me do this," he said simply. "Just this once." Nicole bit her lip. Everything inside her screamed that this was a bad idea. But when she saw the serious expression on his face, she found herself nodding. "Okay." A small, satisfied smirk appeared on Jayden's lips. "Good." He gestured towards the entrance. "Come on, the car's waiting." As Nicole followed him outside, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a ride home. Something was changing between them, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Nicole followed Jayden through the grand entrance of the building, her heart thudding in her chest. Outside, a sleek black car was parked at the curb, its headlights cutting through the darkness. A chauffeur in a neatly pressed suit stepped forward and opened the door. "This is really not necessary," Nicole murmured, feeling out of place. Jayden raised an eyebrow. It's just a ride, Nicole. Just a ride. Then why did it feel like so much more? Nicole sat stiffly, her hands gripping her bag. She had never been in a luxury car before, let alone sitting next to her billionaire boss. Jayden, on the other hand, seemed completely at ease. He loosened his tie slightly, turning to look at her. "You're tense," he noted. Nicole forced a small laugh. "Well, it's not every day I ride in a billionaire's car." Jayden smirked. "It's just a car, Nicole." She turned to him with a raised brow. "That's easy for you to say when you own 100 of them." Jayden chuckled. "I don't own 100. Oh, sorry. 99 then?" Jayden's lips twitched. He liked her sarcasm. Most people around him were either too scared to joke with him or too eager to impress him. But Nicole? She wasn't trying to impress anyone. That made her even more interesting. After a moment of silence, he asked, "How old is your brother?" Nicole blinked at the sudden question. "He's 14, Jayden nodded. "And you take care of him on your own?" "Yes." Her voice softened. "Our parents passed away a few years ago. It's just been the two of us ever since." Jayden was quiet for a moment. He hadn't expected that. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely. Nicole gave him a small smile. "It's okay, I just do what I have to do." Jayden admired that about her. He had met plenty of people who crumbled under pressure, but Nicole was different. She carried the weight of responsibility on her shoulders and didn't complain. He respected that. The car slowed as they approached Nicole's apartment. She exhaled, suddenly feeling self-conscious. She didn't live in a fancy place. It was small and old, nothing like the world Jayden came from. The driver stopped at the curb, and before Nicole could open the door, Jayden spoke. "You shouldn't be walking home this late," he said. "From now on, my driver will take you home after your shift." Nicole's head snapped toward him. "What?" "It's not safe," he said simply. Nicole shook her head. "Sir, that's too much. I can't—" "Jayden." "What?" "Call me Jayden," he said, "at least when we're not at work." Nicole's breath caught. This was dangerous. The way he was looking at her, the way her name sounded on his lips. This wasn't just about a ride home anymore. Something was happening between them, something she wasn't sure she could stop. Nicole stepped out of the car, her heart still racing. "Call me Jayden." Those words lingered in her mind as she hurried up the steps to her small apartment. Why was he making things complicated? He was her boss, a billionaire. And she? She was just the cleaning lady. She pushed open the door to her apartment and let out a deep sigh. "Nicole?" She turned to see her little brother, Daniel, rubbing his eyes as he walked out of his tiny bedroom. He was tall for his age, but thin, too thin, she often worried. "You're home late," he mumbled, still half asleep. Nicole gave him a small smile. "I had a long day." Daniel yawned. "Did you eat?" Nicole hesitated. She had been so caught up with Jayden that she hadn't even thought about dinner. "I'll grab something soon," she said. "Go back to sleep." But Daniel didn't move. He was staring at her suspiciously. "You're acting weird." Nicole forced a laugh. "I'm just tired." Daniel squinted at her. "Are you sure?" Nicole ruffled his hair. "Yes. Now go back to bed." With one last skeptical look, Daniel shuffled back to his room. Nicole sighed and sank onto the couch, pressing her fingers to her temples. What was she doing? She needed to set boundaries. Jayden was just being kind. That's all it was. She couldn't let herself think otherwise. At Jayden's penthouse, Jayden loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of whiskey. He stood near the window, staring at the city skyline, but his mind was elsewhere. Nicole. He had told her to call him by his first name, and the shock on her face had been amusing. But the truth was, he didn't just say it for fun. He wanted her to see him as more than just her boss. That realization unsettled him. He had never cared about what his employees thought of him before. He had never gone out of his way to check on someone's well-being. So why was he doing it now? What was it about Nicole that made him act like this? He took a slow sip of his drink, his mind flashing back to her tired eyes, her soft voice, the way she always put others before herself. She was nothing like the people in his world, and maybe that was exactly why he couldn't stop thinking about her. The next morning, Nicole arrived at work determined to keep things professional. No more late-night rides, no more awkward conversations. She just needed to do her job and stay invisible. But as soon as she stepped into the building, she knew that plan was about to fail, because standing there near the cleaning supply closet was Jayden, and he was waiting for her. Nicole froze. "What are you doing here?" Jayden crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to see you." Her heart pounded. "Sir," Jayden. His voice was firm. "I told you to call me Jayden." Nicole swallowed. This was bad. This was really, really bad. "Fine," she muttered. "Jayden, what do you want?" He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want to take you to dinner." Nicole's world stopped. Dinner? This was no longer just kindness. This was something else, Nicole whispered. Nicole blinked, convinced she had misheard him. Did Jayden Kingston just ask her to dinner? Her throat felt dry. What? Jayden's expression remained calm, as if he hadn't just said something completely ridiculous. "Dinner. Tonight." Nicole's heart pounded. "Why?" "Because I want to." Her fingers clenched around the handle of her mop. "Sir, Jayden," he corrected. She exhaled sharply. "Jayden, you don't have to do this." He raised an eyebrow. "Who said I have to? I want to." Nicole shook her head, trying to gather her thoughts. I don't understand. You're my boss. I clean toilets for a living." Jayden's eyes darkened slightly. So? People like you don't go to dinner with people like me." His jaw tensed. "People like me?" Nicole groaned. "You know what I mean." Jayden took a step closer, his voice low and firm. "Nicole, I don't care what job you do. That doesn't define you." Her breath hitched. Why was he saying things like this? Why was he making it so hard to ignore him? She looked away. "I can't." Jayden studied her for a long moment. "Why not?" Nicole hesitated. "Because this is dangerous, because you make my heart race, because if I let myself get close to you, I might end up getting hurt." But she couldn't say that. Instead, she forced a smile and shrugged. "I just don't think it's a good idea." For the first time, Jayden looked frustrated. Not angry, just frustrated. "All right," he said slowly. "If dinner is too much, how about coffee?" Nicole's head snapped up. "What?" His lips curved into an amused smile. "Coffee. It's just a drink, Nicole. No fancy restaurants, no pressure, just two people having coffee." Nicole bit her lip. That sounded harmless. "Right?" Jayden tilted his head. "You owe me, remember?" She frowned. "For what?" "For falling asleep in my bathroom," Nicole gasped. "That's not fair." Jayden smirked. "It's completely fair," Nicole groaned, rubbing her forehead. This man was impossible. But a tiny part of her, a dangerous, foolish part, was tempted. Just coffee. What could go wrong? She exhaled. "Fine. One coffee, but that's it." Jayden's smirk deepened. "One coffee," he agreed. But there was something in his eyes that told her this wasn't just about coffee. And deep down, Nicole knew it too. Nicole kept telling herself it was just one coffee. Nothing more, nothing less. But as she sat across from Jayden Kingston in a cozy little cafe near the office, she realized how completely wrong she was. Because there was nothing casual about sitting across from a billionaire in a place that probably cost more than her monthly salary just for a cup of coffee. She shifted awkwardly in her chair, staring at the untouched cup in front of her. "This place is nice," she muttered. "You don't like it." Nicole looked up, startled. "What? No, I didn't say that." "You don't have to." His eyes gleamed with amusement. "You're stiff as a board." Nicole huffed. "Maybe because I'm sitting across from my boss in a cafe that charges $20 for a latte." Jayden leaned back, his expression relaxed. "It's just coffee, Nicole." She exhaled. "You keep saying that." Because it's true. Nicole glanced around. The other customers were well-dressed, polished, and elegant, unlike her. She suddenly felt self-conscious in her simple work clothes. Jayden must have noticed because he sighed and leaned forward. Nicole. She looked up. I don't care about any of this, he said, gesturing around the cafe. And neither should you. Nicole bit her lip. Easy for you to say. You belong here. His eyes darkened slightly. And you think you don't? Nicole hesitated. Number I don't. Jayden was quiet for a moment, his gaze unreadable. Then he asked, Have you ever done this before? Nicole frowned. Done what? Sat down like this, had coffee, talked. Nicole blinked. Why was he asking that? I mean, not with someone like you, she admitted. Jayden tilted his head. Someone like me? She sighed. Rich, powerful, a CEO. He studied her. And what if I wasn't any of those things? Nicole let out a small laugh. Then you wouldn't be sitting here in a $1,000 suit. Jayden smirked, but didn't argue. Fair point. Nicole shook her head. Seriously, why are you doing this? Jayden's gaze softened. Because I want to know you. Nicole's breath caught. No, no, no. This was dangerous. She had spent her whole life avoiding situations like this. Complicated situations. Because people like Jayden didn't belong in her world, and she definitely didn't belong in his. Nicole cleared her throat, trying to ignore the heat creeping up her neck. Well, now you know. I'm just a girl who cleans bathrooms for a living. Jayden's eyes locked onto hers. You're more than that. Nicole's heart pounded. She needed to end this, now. She grabbed her cup, taking a quick sip, then stood up. Well, thanks for the coffee. I should get going. Jayden raised an eyebrow. Running away already? Nicole forced a smile. Not running, just leaving. Jayden watched her for a moment, then smirked. Fine, but this isn't over. Nicole turned to walk away, but her pulse was racing, because deep down, she knew he was right. This wasn't over. Not even close. Nicole hurried out of the cafe, her heart pounding like a drum. What had just happened? She had agreed to one coffee, just a simple drink, nothing else. But sitting across from Jayden, hearing him say he wanted to know her, it felt like stepping onto dangerous ground, a ground she had no business standing on. As she walked toward the bus stop, she barely noticed the city lights glowing around her. Her mind was still in that cafe, replaying Jayden's words over and over again. You're more than that. Why did that sentence make her chest feel tight? Nicole! She jumped at the sound of her name. Spinning around, she saw Jayden standing behind her, hands in his pockets, watching her with an amused smirk. Her eyes widened. What are you... She glanced around. Did you follow me? Jayden lifted a brow. I walked out right after you. Nicole swallowed. Right. That makes sense. She forced herself to stand tall. Well, you should go home. I'm fine. Jayden ignored her and glanced at the bus stop sign. You're taking the bus? Nicole crossed her arms. Yes. Jayden sighed. Nicole, we talked about this. She narrowed her eyes. No, you talked. I never agreed to anything. Jayden ran a hand through his hair, clearly annoyed. Why are you stubborn? Nicole? Jayden chuckled, shaking his head. Come on, my driver's waiting. Nicole tensed. Jayden? Nicole, he said firmly. It's late. You're exhausted, and whether you like it or not, I care. Nicole's breath hitched. He said it so simply, so effortlessly. I care, and that was the problem. She wasn't used to people caring about her. It had always been her against the world. Working, fighting, surviving. She didn't know what to do when someone cared. Jayden must have noticed the battle in her eyes because his expression softened. Let me take you home. That's all. Nicole hesitated. She should say no, but she didn't. She sighed and rubbed her forehead. Fine, but just this once. Jayden smirked. You keep saying that. Nicole rolled her eyes but followed him to the waiting car. As the driver pulled away, she stared out the window, feeling something shift inside her. This wasn't just coffee, this wasn't just a ride. Something was happening between them, and no matter how hard she tried to fight it, she knew she was losing. Nicole sat stiffly in the luxurious car, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag like it was a lifeline. The smooth hum of the engine and the soft glow of the city lights outside should have made the ride feel peaceful, but it didn't, because Jayden was sitting right next to her, and that was anything but peaceful. "Relax, Nicole," Jayden said, his voice amused. "I don't bite." She let out a dry laugh, keeping her eyes on the window. "That's easy for you to say. You're used to this kind of life." Jayden tilted his head. "What kind of life?" She gestured vaguely at the expensive leather seats and the tinted windows. "This. Private cars, fancy coffee shops, billionaire problems." Jayden smirked. "And what do you think billionaire problems are?" Nicole shrugged. "Oh, I don't know. Like what color yacht to buy next? Or what five-star restaurant to have dinner at?" Jayden chuckled. "Wow, you really think that's all I do?" She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Isn't it?" Jayden didn't answer right away. Instead, he studied her, like he was trying to see past her words, past her sarcasm. "I work hard, Nicole," he finally said, his voice quieter now. "Probably harder than you think?" Nicole scoffed. "Yeah, but you don't have to worry about things like rent, or groceries, or medical bills." Jayden was silent for a moment before saying, "No, I don't, but that doesn't mean I don't have struggles." Nicole frowned. "Like what?" Jayden hesitated before looking out the window. "Like knowing who to trust." Nicole blinked. She hadn't expected that. Jayden turned back to her. "When you have money, people want things from you. They smile in your face, pretend to care, but in the end, they just want something." Nicole's chest tightened. She had never thought about it that way. "But you," Jayden's voice softened. "You don't want anything from me." Nicole sucked in a breath. It was true. She had never asked for his money, his influence, or his help. All she had ever wanted was to do her job and survive. And yet, here they were. The car slowed as they approached her apartment building. Nicole let out a relieved sigh. "Well, thanks for the ride." She reached for the door handle, but Jayden's voice stopped her. "Nicole." She turned back to him. "Do you ever let people in?" he asked, his gaze searching hers. Nicole's heart pounded. Numbers she never let people in. Not since her parents died. Not since the world taught her that caring too much only led to pain. But she couldn't say that. Instead, she forced a smile and shrugged. "Depends on the person." Jayden's lips curved slightly. "And what if I want to be that person?" Nicole's breath caught. This was getting dangerous. She quickly opened the door and stepped out. "Good night, Jayden." Before he could say another word, she shut the door and hurried inside. But even as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, his words echoed in her mind. What if I want to be that person? And the scariest part? She didn't know if she wanted to stop him. Nicole tossed and turned all night, Jayden's words haunting her like a song stuck on repeat. What if I want to be that person? Why did he have to say that? Why did he have to make this complicated? She wasn't supposed to feel anything for him. Jayden was her boss, a billionaire, someone far, far out of her reach. And yet every time she looked into his eyes, she felt something she had no business feeling. By the time morning arrived, she was exhausted but determined. She had to build a wall, a big, strong, unbreakable wall, for her own sake, for both of their sakes. At the office, Nicole entered the building with her cleaning cart, keeping her head low, avoiding eye contact with everyone. But fate had other plans, because the first person she ran into was the one person she was trying to avoid. Jayden. He was standing near the elevator, talking to someone, dressed in a sharp navy blue suit that made him look even more intimidating. But the moment his eyes landed on her, his expression changed. He didn't look like a powerful CEO. He looked like a man who had been waiting for her. Nicole's heart skipped a beat. She gripped the cart tighter and quickly turned down the hall. Nope, Not today.